William didn't know that Harry and Meghan had already recorded their poison.
Long before the public fractures, explosive interviews, and royal departures, Catherine allegedly noticed something others refused to confront. Behind palace doors, she delivered a private warning about Meghan, but instead of acting, senior officials buried it, fearing the truth could trigger a crisis the monarchy was desperate to avoid. At first, nothing appeared broken. The public saw polished appearances, controlled smiles, and a younger generation presented as proof that the monarchy could survive the future. Yet away from the ceremonies, the atmosphere was allegedly changing. Conversations became shorter. Replies grew more careful. Meetings that once felt informal began to carry an uncomfortable tension, as though every sentence might later be remembered as evidence. Catherine had spent years learning how the palace truly communicated. Power was rarely declared. It appeared in a changed seat, a missing name, a restricted briefing, or a schedule revised without explanation. She had learned to notice what others overlooked, and what she reportedly saw around Meghan unsettled her. Meghan was questioning customs that royal newcomers had traditionally been expected to accept. Catherine did not necessarily oppose change. She understood that many traditions could feel cold, confusing, even cruel. She had endured public criticism, loneliness, and relentless pressure herself. But she allegedly feared that ordinary resistance was becoming something more dangerous. Every correction seemed personal. Every limitation appeared hostile. Every disagreement risked being remembered not as adjustment, but as betrayal. That was where Catherine's sympathy collided with her alarm. She could understand Meghan's frustration while still believing her reaction was dividing the family. And the deeper the resentment grew, the more Harry seemed to move with it. According to the dramatized account, Catherine quietly approached a trusted palace figure. Her warning was not that Meghan would simply become unhappy. It was that unresolved grievances were building beneath the surface, and Harry could eventually be drawn into a permanent struggle against his own family. Once that happened, she feared affection, duty, and even royal loyalty might not be enough to pull him back. Senior officials allegedly dismissed the concern as tension between two very different women. They believed time would soften it, duty would contain it. Public appearances would create cooperation, even if private warmth never came. But Catherine reportedly insisted they were misunderstanding the threat. This was not merely about personality. It was about trust, influence, loyalty, and two opposing ideas of what royal life should demand. Her warning also contained one prediction, specific enough to make advisors uncomfortable, yet dramatic enough for them to ignore. At the time, they called it excessive caution. Years later, those same words would allegedly return with devastating force. The palace had chosen its familiar weakness. It focused on preventing the scandal of the moment while allowing a far greater crisis to gather strength in silence. But Catherine's concern did not emerge from a single disagreement. It grew from a series of private incidents that revealed how quickly trust inside the palace was beginning to collapse. The public saw two royal couples representing a modern monarchy. Inside the institution, however, every meeting seemed to leave another wound. Private conversations were repeated, harmless comments became accusations, and Catherine slowly realized that the palace was no longer managing a family disagreement, it was watching rival camps form. William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan had been presented as the monarchy's future. Together, they represented youth, renewal, and the promise that the institution could evolve without losing its identity. Their shared appearances carried enormous weight. They were not simply four relatives standing side by side. They were being sold as a united force capable of carrying the crown beyond King Charles III's reign. Behind that hopeful image, however, the machinery was already grinding against itself. Disputes allegedly emerged over staff responsibilities, charitable projects, media responses, household authority, and how quickly new ideas should be accepted. Meghan reportedly wanted decisions made with greater speed and freedom. Palace officials moved slowly, guided by layers of approval and traditions designed to resist sudden change. The same conversations were remembered in completely different ways. To an aide, a delayed request might have been routine procedure. To Meghan, it could feel like another closed door. A suggestion meant as guidance could be received as control. A warning about protocol could sound like criticism of her character. Catherine allegedly began to understand that the problem was no longer only what people said, but what each side believed those words meant. That made private conversations increasingly dangerous. Catherine reportedly became careful with every phrase because she feared emotional exchanges could leave the room stripped of context. A tense family discussion might later be remembered as proof of cruelty. An awkward attempt to help could be retold as deliberate humiliation. Harry's defensiveness deepened the divide. He reportedly believed Meghan was being judged by rules others had never been forced to endure. Every criticism seemed to confirm his suspicion that the family had failed to protect her. Catherine, however, feared that Harry was beginning to hear any concern about Meghan as an attack from the entire monarchy. Her position became painfully difficult. She did not want Meghan to see her as another enemy. She understood the loneliness of entering royal life and being examined without mercy. But silence felt equally dangerous. Each unresolved grievance seemed to convince Harry and Meghan that they were standing alone. Catherine allegedly attempted one private conversation meant to clear the air. Instead, it ended with both women feeling wounded and misunderstood. No explosion, no dramatic resolution, just a colder distance than before. Catherine left convinced that ordinary reassurance would not repair what was forming. Palace advisors responded by arranging more public unity, believing repeated appearances would create genuine closeness. Instead, the performance may have sharpened the resentment. They were being asked to appear united, while trust was disappearing behind every smile. From that point, Catherine reportedly began remembering every detail, not to build a case against Meghan, but because she feared the palace might one day claim it had never been warned. As the private tension intensified, Catherine began to see that Meghan's conflict was no longer limited to protocol or personality, it was becoming a struggle over who controlled the royal narrative. Inside royal life, the most dangerous weapon is not a crown, title, or official document. It is the power to decide which version of events survives. Catherine allegedly realized Meghan was preparing to tell her own story and feared the palace had already lost control before it understood a battle had begun. For generations, the monarchy had survived by controlling what escaped its walls. Anger was absorbed privately. Embarrassment was softened through carefully chosen statements. Family disputes were hidden beneath duty, ceremony, and silence. The system depended on one belief: whatever happened behind closed doors must remain there, because protecting the family also meant protecting the crown. Meghan reportedly saw that silence in a very different way. To palace officials, it was discipline. To her, it could feel like erasure. They believed they were preventing further damage. She allegedly believed they were preventing her from defending herself. The same silence that had protected royal figures for decades now appeared, in her eyes, to protect everyone except her. Catherine reportedly understood that this difference was not minor. It was the heart of the conflict. The palace believed time would cool resentment and discretion would contain the damage. Meghan appeared determined to challenge stories she considered false, even if correcting them meant exposing private conversations and family tensions. The media made everything worse. Negative reports surrounding Meghan deepened Harry's anger, while constant comparisons between the two women created the impression of a rivalry neither could easily escape. Catherine was praised as calm, dutiful, and dependable. Meghan was often described as demanding or disruptive. Those comparisons may have strengthened Catherine's public standing, but they also placed her inside a battle she feared would become deeply personal. She reportedly disliked being used as a weapon against Meghan, yet every new headline seemed to harden the divide. Harry allegedly believed the palace had failed to defend his wife when she needed it most. Palace officials insisted they had intervened quietly, corrected stories, and contained damaging claims without drawing attention to their efforts. But because those actions remained hidden, Harry saw only silence. Catherine allegedly recognized the pattern before others did. Each side believed it had been wronged. Every explanation created another accusation. Every attempt to defend the past reopened an older wound. The conflict no longer needed a new incident to survive. It was feeding itself. William's concern reportedly became more practical and severe. He worried about staff, discipline, royal duties, and Harry's growing distance from the institution. Catherine focused on something more emotional. She feared Harry was nearing a point where anger would become identity, and once that happened, returning might feel like surrender. Her most serious intervention allegedly came when she became convinced Meghan no longer trusted the monarchy enough to protect its secrets. A confidential meeting was arranged with William and senior advisors. Catherine entered knowing the room expected caution. What she brought instead was a warning. What Catherine allegedly said in that room was not a complaint about Meghan's personality, it was a prediction about the future of the monarchy, and it would become the secret at the center of everything that followed. Catherine's warning was direct, unsettling, and almost impossible for the palace to accept. She allegedly said Meghan would not simply walk away. If the pressure became unbearable, she would leave, believing she had been betrayed. And Harry would help her expose every private failure they believed the monarchy had committed. Inside that confidential meeting, Catherine reportedly abandoned the careful language the palace preferred. She warned senior figures that unless trust was rebuilt immediately, Meghan and Harry would not merely become distant. They would leave royal life, reject the institution's account of what had happened, and challenge it before the entire world. The reason, Catherine allegedly explained, was simple but dangerous. Meghan did not see palace silence as neutral. When negative stories spread without a forceful response, she reportedly believed silence helped those stories survive. If she eventually walked away, speaking publicly would not feel like betrayal to her. It would feel like self-defense. But Catherine's deepest concern was Harry. She feared his anger toward the press, childhood trauma, and unresolved grief surrounding Princess Diana had created an emotional wound the palace still did not understand. If Harry began to believe Meghan was suffering in the same way his mother had suffered, every disagreement would become part of a much older tragedy. A delayed decision would look like abandonment. A warning about protocol would feel like control. A family dispute would become proof that history was repeating itself. Once that connection took hold, Catherine reportedly argued, ordinary negotiation would fail. Harry would no longer be defending only his wife. He would believe he was finally protecting the woman he loved in the way he had been unable to protect his mother. Then came the prediction advisors allegedly found impossible to accept. Catherine warned that interviews could follow. Private accounts might be shared. Media projects, personal revelations, and accusations against the institution could turn a family fracture into an international reckoning. Some officials dismissed the possibility as extreme. They believed Harry's devotion to Queen Elizabeth II and his lifelong connection to the crown would stop him before he crossed that line. Catherine was not convinced. She urged them to stop treating the crisis as a temporary public relations problem. Meghan needed clearer support. Harry needed an honest emotional intervention. Both needed firm boundaries and a truthful explanation of what royal life could, and could not, offer them. William reportedly agreed that action was necessary, but he focused on stronger controls around staff, authority, and palace operations. Catherine feared boundaries without reconciliation would send the worst possible message that Harry and Meghan were being managed out of the family. The contradiction was brutal. Catherine was allegedly warning officials about the consequences of alienating Meghan. Yet the warning itself could later be portrayed as proof that she had always considered Meghan dangerous. The palace chose patience. Controlled statements. More public unity. No sweeping intervention followed. But Catherine's prediction had now been spoken before witnesses. When Harry and Meghan later stepped away and began telling their story publicly, those who had sat inside that meeting allegedly remembered every word. Catherine's warning had answered what she feared, but the next revelation was even more damaging, because palace officials may have understood the danger and chosen not to act anyway. The palace did not ignore Catherine because her warning lacked credibility. It allegedly ignored her because accepting it would have forced the monarchy to confront its own failures. Senior figures feared intervention could provoke Meghan, embarrass Harry, divide the family, and expose how little control remained behind the palace gates. The institution was already carrying more pressure than it wanted the public to see. Queen Elizabeth II was growing older. Charles was preparing for the burden of a future reign. Prince Andrew's controversies threatened the family's reputation, while public scrutiny was becoming more intense and less forgiving. At the same time, the monarchy needed William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan to represent stability, youth, and continuity. Admitting that the two households were drifting into open conflict would have shattered that image. So every warning was softened. Every serious concern was treated as temporary. The palace had too much invested in the appearance of unity to admit that unity might already be gone. Advisors allegedly feared that directly confronting Meghan about trust, media strategy, or private conversations could force the crisis into the open. If they questioned her too aggressively, she might feel accused. If they challenged Harry, he might believe the institution was once again protecting itself instead of protecting his wife. The very intervention Catherine wanted was seen as the act most likely to trigger the departure she had predicted. Some officials reportedly believed Harry simply needed time. They expected his anger to fade once the pressure eased. What they failed to understand was that Harry did not see Meghan's treatment as an isolated dispute. He increasingly connected it to Diana, the press, and the pain he had carried since childhood. Space did not calm that fear. It allowed it to harden. The palace structure made matters worse. Separate households had separate advisors, separate communications teams, and different priorities. Information passed through too many hands. Responsibility became blurred. A warning about emotional collapse could be reduced to a staff problem. A crisis of trust could arrive on a senior desk as a scheduling disagreement. Catherine allegedly became furious at how quickly the meaning disappeared. By the time her concern moved through palace channels, the urgency had been stripped away. Charles faced his own impossible conflict. As Harry's father, he reportedly wanted peace. As the future sovereign, he had to defend the institution. His hesitation satisfied no one. Harry could read it as rejection. Meghan could see it as indifference. Palace officials could mistake it for permission to delay. Queen Elizabeth II allegedly trusted duty to hold the family together. That instinct had worked in a world where royal pain remained private. But Meghan and Harry were living in a different age, one shaped by global platforms, personal brands, streaming projects, and the power to speak directly to millions. Catherine reportedly realized the palace was using old rules against a new kind of crisis. Silence no longer controlled the story. It created a space waiting to be filled. And somewhere inside the institution, notes, emails, briefings, or private recollections of her warning may have survived. If they ever emerged, they could prove the palace knew what was coming. The betrayal was complete. Catherine had allegedly tried to prevent the family from breaking apart, yet when the rupture came, she became one of its most visible faces, while those who ignored her remained hidden. Then, the prediction Catherine had delivered in private began unfolding in public. One decision at a time, and the palace could no longer pretend the crisis was temporary. First came the distance. Then came the departure. Finally came the revelations. With every interview, accusation, documentary, and memoir, Catherine's alleged warning appeared more accurate. Yet, the truth emerging was not simply about Meghan's intentions. It exposed how deeply Harry's pain had become inseparable from his fight against the palace. The separation had not happened in a single dramatic moment. It grew slowly, through arguments over independence, royal responsibilities, household control, and the limits placed on Harry and Meghan's future. At first, the question was how they could work within the monarchy on different terms. Eventually, it became whether they could remain inside it at all. When they withdrew from senior royal duties, the announcement reportedly stunned the institution. Yet for Catherine, the shock may have carried a terrible familiarity. The palace had waited for duty to defeat resentment. Instead, resentment had become stronger than tradition, titles, and family loyalty. Then, private pain became a global confrontation. Meghan spoke about isolation and emotional suffering. Harry described an institution he believed had failed to protect his wife and children. Each disclosure challenged the palace's silence, while every unanswered claim made that silence appear heavier. Catherine was allegedly trapped. If she responded, she risked revealing private conversations and worsening the conflict. If she remained quiet, the most damaging version of events could spread without resistance. The discipline that had once protected the monarchy now left her unable to defend herself. The disagreements surrounding the bridesmaids became the clearest example. What may have begun as an emotional clash during wedding preparations was transformed into a public symbol. It no longer mattered only who had cried or what words had been exchanged. The incident became evidence for two opposing stories, one portraying Meghan as mistreated, the other casting Catherine as unfairly blamed. Harry's later disclosures reportedly cut even deeper. Conversations involving William, Charles, and Catherine were no longer protected as family exchanges. They had become part of a public argument over loyalty, accountability, and who had caused the rupture. Catherine allegedly felt anger, grief, and a bitter sense of vindication. Her warning had been correct, but being proven right offered no victory. Harry was estranged from William. Trust had collapsed. Every revelation pushed the brothers further apart. William reportedly became fiercely protective of Catherine and increasingly cautious about private contact. To him, each disclosure proved that reconciliation without confidentiality was impossible. Harry and Meghan allegedly reached the opposite conclusion. They believed speaking publicly was necessary because private appeals had failed. To them, palace silence showed that their suffering would never be acknowledged unless they forced the world to hear it. The result was a cruel stalemate. The Sussexes demanded recognition before trust could return. The royal family demanded trust before honest conversations could begin. But as both sides defended their own version of events, one question became impossible to avoid. Who inside the palace had known Catherine's warning, and who was now allowing her to carry the blame? Catherine had allegedly tried to stop the rupture, yet she emerged as one of its most recognizable villains. The palace remained silent, Meghan's supporters questioned Catherine's behavior, and Harry's disclosures placed her under a spotlight she could not answer without breaking the same royal rules she had spent years protecting. The conflict had now become larger than the private conversations that created it. Catherine and Meghan were no longer treated merely as two women struggling inside the same institution. They had become symbols of opposing ideas about royal life. Catherine represented endurance, restraint, and loyalty to tradition. Meghan represented independence, resistance, and the refusal to suffer silently. That contrast turned every gesture into evidence. A smile could be called false. A distant expression could be labeled cold. Even an absence could be interpreted as a deliberate insult. Catherine allegedly believed the palace had failed her. Senior officials knew she had raised concerns before the rupture became public. They knew she had pushed for intervention rather than isolation. Yet none of that could be revealed without creating another crisis. If Catherine publicly explained her warning, she risked appearing calculating. It could suggest that she had distrusted Meghan from the beginning or had joined secret discussions about removing her. Harry might see the disclosure as confirmation that his wife had always been treated as a threat. The very truth that could defend Catherine might also deepen the family's wounds. So silence became another sacrifice. She absorbed accusations without offering the context that might have changed how the public understood her role. The pressure reportedly strengthened her bond with William. He saw how deeply the conflict affected her and became more protective. But their future now carried a darker weight. They were not simply preparing to become king and queen. They were preparing to inherit a monarchy divided by family testimony, public suspicion, and private memories that could surface at any moment. Catherine allegedly became careful around Harry and Meghan because no response felt safe. Warmth might look staged. Distance could appear cruel. Neutrality might be treated as hostility. The smallest movement could become a headline before anyone understood its meaning. And some inside the institution may have found that useful. As long as the feud was framed as a rivalry between Catherine and Meghan, attention remained fixed on two women. Fewer questions were directed toward the advisors, households, and senior figures who had watched the crisis develop and failed to stop it. The betrayal reportedly deepened when fragments of Catherine's early concerns began circulating among commentators and former aides. But the details were incomplete. Her warning was repeated without the crucial truth that she had allegedly wanted Meghan supported. Harry reached emotionally, and the family protected from permanent division. Catherine had not predicted disaster because she wanted Meghan gone. She feared it because she understood how completely Harry might break from the monarchy if he believed his wife had been abandoned. That warning was no longer buried. Quietly, it had become a guide. Every discussion involving invitations, titles, private access, ceremonies, or reconciliation was now shaped by the danger she had described years earlier. The truth coming out was no longer only about what Catherine had predicted it was about how her warning had quietly rewritten the monarchy's strategy for dealing with Harry and Meghan forever. Years after Catherine allegedly delivered her warning, its shadow still hangs over every invitation, private call, ceremonial decision, and reconciliation rumor. The palace may want peace, Harry may want acknowledgement, and Meghan may want accountability, but none of them can escape the truth Catherine saw before anyone else. The warning now influences almost every decision involving the Sussexes. Any private conversation carries a risk. A phone call could later be described in an interview. A family disagreement might appear in a memoir. A confidential offer could reach the public through unnamed sources. What was once a relationship crisis has become a crisis of access, with the palace questioning how much can safely be shared. William reportedly sees confidentiality as the starting point for any reconciliation. Without it, he cannot risk exposing Catherine, their children, or the future monarchy to another round of revelations. To him, trust must come before closeness. Harry allegedly sees that caution differently. He may view it as punishment, a sign that the family still values institutional control more than emotional repair. Yet the safeguards created because of past disclosures now make the openness he wants even harder to achieve. Each side waits for the other to move first, and neither believes it can do so safely. Meghan's position is equally difficult. Returning to royal contact without a public acknowledgement of her suffering could appear to weaken everything she has said. But continuing the confrontation risks permanently closing a door she once entered with extraordinary hope. Catherine reportedly faces the deepest contradiction. She may understand why Meghan wanted to defend herself, yet she also believes the method of public disclosure destroyed the privacy required for healing. Speaking brought recognition, but it also made future honesty more dangerous. For King Charles III, every decision carries two consequences. As a father, he may want Harry back. As sovereign, he must protect the crown. Questions involving invitations, titles, security, or private access can quickly reopen the entire conflict. The dispute is now larger than 4 people. It has become a test of whether the monarchy can adapt, protect newcomers, resolve emotional pain, and survive in an age where silence no longer ends the story. That was the deeper meaning of Catherine's warning. She did not merely predict that Meghan and Harry would leave or speak publicly. She allegedly feared that ignored pain would turn private wounds into a worldwide argument over the monarchy itself. And the truth coming out does not completely vindicate Catherine or condemn Meghan. Instead, it reveals fear, pride, trauma, loyalty, and hesitation, each person believing they were protecting something precious while helping destroy the trust between them. Private records, unreleased correspondence, and conflicting memories may still remain. If they ever emerge, the public may finally learn whether Catherine's intervention could have saved the family or whether the collapse had already begun before she spoke. And until those final secrets are revealed, the monarchy will remain trapped inside the warning it once ignored, knowing that the next truth to come out could reopen every wound behind the palace doors.